Hello. As president of the ARC New York, I am proud to present to you part one in a series of videos and publications dedicated to the history of our organization. The Legacy Project, Stories of Love, Determination, and Reflection, is helping to capture personal stories of those who have helped shape the organization since its formation. It incorporates all of the human experiences, from the tragedies of human suffering and disappointments to the joy of personal growth and accomplishment, to the celebration of personal and organizational victories. The Legacy Project can be thought of as an archival gift to the organization and the people who have been or are part of it today. It is a compilation of real-life experiences and stories that can be passed down from one generation to another. These stories must never be lost to time. What you are about to see may be difficult. However, I feel that it is essential for us to start at the beginning. It is an important part of who we are today and why we continue to do what we do. We must never forget this part of our history, as we are indeed still part of a social justice movement that must prevail if we are to ensure that we never go back to the days when our loved ones were not valued. Many of us have traveled this road together, and I want to thank each of you for doing your part. I can say, without a doubt, that we are most definitely stronger together.
I visited the state institutions for the mentally retarded, and I think that particularly at Willowbrook that we have a situation that borders on a snake pit, and that the children live in filth, that many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower. There's very little future for the children or for those who are in these institutions.
It's been more than 6 years since Robert Kennedy walked out of one of the wards here at Willowbrook and told newsmen of the horror he'd seen inside. He pleaded then for an overhaul of the system that allowed retarded children to live in a snake pit. I first heard of this big place with the pretty sounding name because of a call I received from a member of the Willowbrook staff, Dr. Michael Wilkins. The doctor told me he'd just been fired because he'd been urging parents with children in one of the buildings, building number 6, to organize, so they could more effectively demand improved conditions for their children. The doctor invited me to see the conditions he was talking about, so unannounced and unexpected by the school administration, we toured building number 6. We've just seen something that's probably the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life. Is that typical of ward life?
Yes, there are 5,300 patients at Willowbrook, which is the largest institution for the mentally retarded in the world. The ones that we saw were the most severely and profoundly retarded. There are thousands there like that, not going to school, sitting on the ward all day, not being talked to by anyone.
I became involved basically because there was a need to be involved. My son was at Willowbrook State School, and someone had to step up and someone had to involve themselves. And I and a number of other parents chose to do so. Will was actually had rubella, and he was part of the rubella epidemic that took the United States from about 1954 through 1956.
The parent movement, okay, that really didn't start at all until 1950, and it really wasn't until the 1960s. And it became known that President Kennedy, JFK, had a sister with mental retardation, and Eunice Shriver was very vocal in talking about that. That made it easy for parents who had been stigmatized themselves to come out and to admit they had a child with mental retardation and to say, we're not going to accept traditional practices. We're not going to accept warehousing.
At the time that I became the executive director of Sullivan, the field was really just beginning. There were more individuals with developmental disabilities that lived in the institutions, that lived in the community. So I think myself and a lot of the other execs that were around at the time, we saw ourselves as somewhat pioneers. We saw it as almost a civil rights issue, and we began to, I think, set as our goal, and certainly for me, one of my goals and aspirations was to take everybody out of the 21 institutions in New York State that serve the developmental disabilities that belong to Sullivan County, and to bring them back to Sullivan County. And I'm proud to say that in my 11 years there, we accomplished that goal.
You put a child in Willowbrook, they tell you, don't come back for 6 weeks. And that meant don't come back for 6 weeks. And when we came back to find him, he was no longer in the baby building. He had been transferred to building 76. And the reason for his transfer was we were told that he was running up and down the aisles. Don't forget, this place was bed-to-bed babies. And he was pulling out, these were critical, some cases, babies with real problems, and he was pulling out lines, and he was very disruptive. And they transferred him to building 76. Building 76 at that time was overcrowded. The smell when you walked in was unbelievable.
The building that I worked in, Building 6, was the one Geraldo did the expose in, and it truly was what you saw. Dozens and dozens of men with sometimes no clothing, wearing their scrambled eggs. That's it. The clothing didn't come in, so they didn't have any. People were drinking out of the toilet. There were no water fountains.
It was a period shortly after Lowell was born when we knew what was going on, and I was walking outside and I said to God, God, please take him. Come take him, because his life is going to be a very, very bad one. And I know that, and we can make this so much more simple. You just come and you just get him. And for the only time in my life that God had spoken to me, he said, I gave him to you for you to watch. Now, Ida started, and I've documented this. Once she saw someone yelling and saying we should thank New York, every Saturday after that, Ida was there handing out leaflets. Every Sunday, Ida was there. And for Ida, it was a 3-hour trip on a Saturday or Sunday to get to Staten Island. So it wasn't just, she knew there was a problem and she reacted.
Katie was born in 1966. She suffered brain damage at birth, and at 9 months of age, after having told the doctor several times about her, what we called at that time head nods, because we didn't know what else to describe them as, and he had asked us to keep count, and she had reached 100 a day. He diagnosed her as having a seizure disorder, very complex seizure disorder as it turned out, and that she was mentally retarded and also autistic. I became involved with NYSARC, as it was known at the time. Well, it was the New York State Association for Retarded Children. After I had been encouraged to join a parents group at the West Seneca Developmental Center. That parents group were the parents group of the state school. And that group evolved into a chapter of NYSARC. I kind of latched on to that group. It was such a network and such a resource, and to hear other people's problems and issues and what they considered at times solutions to what they were going through was incredibly important to me.
I became involved with the Bronx Developmental Center Parents Association because of Ida Rios. My sister's name is Debbie. At the age of 18 months, she went into epileptic seizures for 6 weeks continuous. She lost her sight, she lost her hearing, she lost her speech, she lost her mobility. She eventually got back her mobility, her sight, and her hearing, but she never got back her speech or her mental capacity. It just started to take a toll on everybody in the house because somebody had to be behind her. My mother took her, for one of her checkups to the pediatricians. They said to my mother, "You have 2 other children, you have to make a choice." I remember the night my dad had to bring her to drop her off, and they didn't know where she was going to go. And all my father kept thinking was who was going to change her diaper and who was going to feed her.
The real heroes, to some extent, are 2 doctors that were at Willowbrook, 2 young doctors. And the doctor that I'm familiar with is William Bronston. And basically, he was the one who approached the parents in the beginning and said, let's get together, let's talk. And I'm going to tell you about some of the things that are going on here. Because there was no way to find out or get enlightened. And so I went to Dr. Bronson's house, and I went with a number of other people. And he began to say to us, he actually began to teach us how to advocate, teach us what to say, when to say it, how to say it, and how to do something to actually cause the administration to take notice of us.
When I was, I would say, in my teens, my sister was residing, who was about 16 years older than myself, at Wassaic. And my parents would take a probably every other weekend bus trip from Manhattan to Wassaic, 2 hours. And as I got older, I started to make that trip with them. My sister was born in '36. Her diagnosis was Prader-Willi syndrome. She remained home with my parents and actually successfully completed 6th grade at the local public school in my neighborhood. But her behaviors were quite a different story. My mother used to recall how when she waited for my sister after school, parents would be so mean to my mother, like, keep your daughter away from my child. The behaviors were the thing that kept her from staying at home. We took the 2-hour bus trip or the car trip, let us off at B building. We were never allowed inside. In the lobby area, yes. We were never allowed in the living part. I can't even imagine how my parents must have felt that day that they left their child in someone else's hands, in the hands of strangers, to care for her, to live with them. And my sister, in reverse, the same. Why are you leaving me here?
I have 2 sons with developmental disabilities. Craig was born in 1967 and Jeff was born in 1969. There was never an aha moment. There was never a doctor who would come and said, your boys have developmental disabilities, or then they would say we're mentally retarded. I think we felt the full gamut of emotions. There was acceptance, we were ostracized, we were mocked, we were welcomed. You know, everything that you can imagine happened. It was hard. Eventually you get through all those trials, and there was great acceptance. I learned so much being part of ARC. I learned that you can have a cohesive voice, that you can be a part of something, you can be part of the change, and that was important to me. I got strength from being a part of a parent group. When you're not doing it alone and you hear the stories other parents are going through, that's really a good part of the reassurance that you're going to get through it.
The Developmental Center Committee was really a great committee to be on, and I think that we really did some very important work. We promoted the closure legislation and humane placement legislation, and I think the closure legislation was one of the real highlights of the committee's work.
When I look back, I think if you would ask me what was the greatest thing I have ever done, it was to lend my name to that consent decree. Because although that consent decree was about a very small group of people, everyone in the United States and across the world benefited from the results of that lawsuit.
First, I got involved with the legislative committee when Ellie Patterson was president. And I went to New York for meetings at the Flatiron Building. And in those days, we didn't have secretaries. Ellie Patterson talked about every single piece of legislation. In my very first meeting, she asked me to be secretary. I had about 17 pages of notes. I've been on the legislative committee since those days. And of course, the DC committee, you know, being there over the years and seeing the closures and all the accomplishments it has made, legislation for ombudsman, that's been good things, you know.
I think another important thing that the DC committee did was we researched all of the graves. Mary Murphy and Ellen Owens, myself and Roxanne Pecora took us on a tour of the grave sites at Wassaic. And it was really rather appalling.
It was difficult to imagine that people were there because there was really nothing to note that. There was a group called the 1033 group, which really initiated helping with particular cemeteries. And the 1033 group was formed from an imprint of the marker 1033, which was at Wassaic State School Cemetery. At Weeder Road, there were a couple that we tripped over, and I said, oh, I wonder if there are more, and there actually were 550 of them. So we were able to help some families locate the exact grave of their ancestors. It's difficult to explain to the family members what they're going to see, because in some cases they didn't know, but they were very gratified to be able to do that.
The grass, it was hay. It wasn't even grass. They were working row by row, literally bending into a hole up to their waist and pulling up the metal marker which sat into a piece of cement. What struck me is the use of metal detectors to find where the plaques actually were. That was the feeling back in the day. Take these individuals and just shove them aside, get them out of the way, and even in death, they're pushed aside.
We've been concerned for a long time about the people residing in residences that are operated by a DDSO. And at one time or another, several of those facilities had chapters, you know, just like our chapter, had advocacy committees who represented these folks, you know, and with administration and, you know, monitored their activities, looked at the quality of care they were receiving, and were pretty active in trying to make sure that everybody was getting the best care that was possible. And when folks left the center and went into community residences, and eventually the chapters closed, I was always, and still am, concerned with those folks in those residences who have no representation.
As you know, in the past, the DC chapters were the watchdogs of the campuses. Now without the institutions, these individuals that are in state-run homes have no one that really, except the state itself, to watch over them. Kind of like the fox watching the hen house. And someone needs to be an advocate for the people who cannot advocate for themselves, that live in state-run housing.
When the Justice Center was formed and the Ombudsman program was already under OPWDD, you know, there was not much independence with it, and that ability to advocate for those people was lost. So as a person from a developmental center and knowing a lot of people need that level of advocacy, I've always wanted the community chapters to become involved in the advocacy efforts for those people living in those residences. The problems that existed at the developmental centers, you know, don't necessarily end at those doors. You know, an institution can be anywhere. You know, it's not just a brick and mortar building. It can be anywhere. And isolation in a group home, and poor care in a group home, and poor supervision, you know, it all can exist. And if you don't have that network, and you have to look at the age of a lot of the folks that moved out, and their parents are elderly, or they're deceased, you know, or there is no one. You know, if you don't have that network of people being active and being vigilant and staying on someone's behind to get something done, you know, what happens to all of that? Then you end up with little mini institutions all over the place and no one even knows what's going on.
One of the chapters sold jewelry, and it was a key, and it has ARC on it. And I was always proud to wear this. And there's a home, some people see a closed door and they turn away. Others see a closed door and try the knob. If it didn't fit, they turned away. Still others see a closed door, try the knob. If it doesn't open, they find a key. And if the key doesn't fit, they turn away. A rare few see a closed door, try the knob. If it doesn't open, they find a key. If the key doesn't fit, they make one. That's what ARC has done. They have made the key, they have opened doors for so many folks. We have to be thankful that ARC has been there for us.